I'm 38 and recently widowed. My wife passed away just under a year ago from what doctors labeled a sudden and severe cardiac event. No history, no warning. 1 minute she was watching TV with me on the couch, the next she was gone. I still don't understand how life can change that fast. I've been trying to hold things together for our daughter, Sophie. She's only 6, too young to fully grasp what happened, but old enough to know her mom is never coming back. The house has felt empty since the funeral. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you start questioning your own thoughts. At first, it was just small things. Sophie would draw pictures with her mom in them, normal enough. But she'd talk about things that didn't make sense, like Mommy said I should clean my room, or Mommy told me not to be sad. I chalked it up to grief, her way of coping. Kids make sense of things in their own ways. But about 2 months ago, Sophie started talking to someone at night. I'd hear her from the hallway, whispering in her room after bedtime. When I asked her who she was talking to, she'd shrug and say, "Mommy. She visits me when you're asleep." I didn't know how to respond to that. Grief hallucinations, maybe? I looked it up online and found other parents saying their kids did the same thing after losing a parent. It's common, I told myself. Comforting, even. I didn't press. But it didn't stop. A week after Sophie first mentioned her nightly visits, I started noticing other strange things. Her bedroom door would be wide open in the morning, even though I always closed it before bed. The little stuffed bunny she sleeps with kept ending up on the floor. Once, I found it in the hallway, far from where she sleeps. I asked her why she moved it, and she just looked at me and said, "I didn't. Mommy doesn't like when I cuddle it too tight." That made me pause. I couldn't figure out what that was supposed to mean. My wife had bought Sophie that bunny when she was 3. It was her favorite thing in the world. The idea that she'd say something like that, or that Sophie thought she had, didn't sit right. Then there was the smell. Our bedroom always used to have this faint lavender scent. After she died, it faded like everything else. But last Tuesday, I came home from work and that same exact smell hit me the second I opened the front door. It wasn't some vague memory either. It was strong, like someone had just sprayed her favorite perfume in the hallway. I stood there for a long time, breathing it in and feeling the back of my neck start to prickle. That night, I tucked Sophie in and stayed up late watching TV. Around 1 a.m., I went to check on her like I always do. Her door was open again. And she wasn't alone. From the hallway, I could hear her talking softly, like she was trying not to wake me. Her voice was muffled, but I caught a few words. She said, "Okay, I'll ask Daddy tomorrow, but you promise you won't be mad, right?" I pushed the door open gently. Sophie was sitting up in bed, smiling at the empty corner of the room. She turned to me like nothing was wrong and said, "Mommy says you're hiding something." That's when everything inside me went cold. Because she said it with a calm, knowing smile, like it wasn't just pretend anymore. Like someone had actually told her that. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt afraid. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, or maybe some twisted combination of grief and exhaustion, but Sophie's words stayed with me. "Mommy says you're hiding something." I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't hiding anything, or at least, I didn't think I was. That night, I asked Sophie about it. I kept my voice casual, trying not to scare her. She looked at me for a long time before answering. Not like a kid trying to remember something, more like someone weighing how much to say. And then she said, "Mommy told me not to tell you yet. She says it's not time." That was the last straw. I started digging. Not into ghost stories, or hallucinations, or whatever else Reddit might tell you about dead people visiting their children. I went to something more grounded, my wife's old laptop. It had been sitting in the closet since she died. I couldn't bring myself to go through it before, but now, I had to. I booted it up that night after Sophie went to sleep. The login screen was still the same, her smiling face as the background. Password protected, but I guessed it on the 3rd try. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Emails, old photos, some recipes she never got around to trying. But in the documents folder was a file I'd never seen before. It was just called, "In Case Something Happens." I opened it, and I swear, my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It was a timeline. A list of dates and names. Some I recognized, family, friends. But others were completely unfamiliar. There were notes next to each one. Short phrases. "Do not trust. Ask about the lake house. Gone too soon." Then I saw my name. Just one line. "Marcus, tell him the truth when Sophie turns 7. I sat there staring at the screen for what felt like hours. My birthday was 3 weeks away, and Sophie's 7th birthday is just one day after. And I had no idea what truth my wife had planned to tell me. Or why she'd waited until after her death to do it. I barely slept that night. My mind kept looping back to that line, tell him the truth when Sophie turns 7. What truth? Why that specific age? And why was she planning to reveal it after she was gone? I wanted to believe it was just some weird note, maybe something symbolic or sentimental. But the rest of that document was too deliberate. It wasn't poetic or emotional. It was clinical. Cold. Like she'd written it with purpose, like a checklist for someone else. And that someone wasn't me. The next morning, Sophie was back to normal. Smiling, talking about school, asking if we could go get ice cream after dinner. I watched her closely, wondering if any part of her knew what she'd said to me the night before. She didn't seem like she was pretending. But I also couldn't ignore the shift in her lately, the way she seemed to know things no 6-year-old should. After I dropped her off at school, I called my wife's sister, Emma. We hadn't talked much since the funeral, grief had driven a weird wedge between us, but I needed to know if she'd ever heard of a lake house. It wasn't something we ever owned, and I'd never been there. Emma paused when I brought it up. And then she said, "You're not supposed to know about that." Her voice changed instantly, like she'd just realized she'd said something wrong. I pressed, but she clammed up. Said she had to go. Said it was nothing. But before she hung up, she let something slip, something I don't think she meant to say. It wasn't her decision to hide it. She wanted to tell you, Marcus. She really did. I stood there in my kitchen, the silence screaming in my ears. That afternoon, I picked Sophie up from school early. I told her we were going on a little road trip. She didn't ask where. She just smiled and said, "Mommy said you'd figure it out." We were still in the driveway when I felt it. Something wasn't right in that house. And we weren't coming back until I knew the whole story. I didn't have a destination in mind, but I kept driving. I figured if I could just get some distance from the house, from whatever was going on in there, I'd be able to think straight. Sophie sat in the back seat humming quietly, staring out the window. At one point, she turned to me and said, "It's okay, Daddy. We can go to the lake now." I hadn't mentioned the lake to her. Not a word. I asked her what she meant, but she just smiled and said, "You'll see." I stopped at a diner on the outskirts of town. While Sophie ate pancakes, I used my phone to search everything I could, her name, my name, her family history. I even pulled up old property records, just hoping something might jump out. Then I remembered my wife's maiden name, Hollis, and searched for that. That's when I found it. A small listing in a rural part of the state. A cottage deeded to a woman named Ia Hollis, and transferred 10 years ago to S. Kessler, my wife's name before we married. There it was. The lake house. It was real. I stared at the screen for a long time. She'd never mentioned it. Never taken me there. Never even hinted it existed. We'd been married for almost 9 years, and I thought I knew everything about her. Apparently not. I looked over at Sophie. She was coloring a placemat, humming the same tune from the car. When I asked her how she knew about the lake house, she didn't hesitate. "That's where Mommy goes when she's tired." The waitress came over before I could say anything else. We got back in the car and started driving again. Toward the lake. I don't know what I expected to find out there. But deep down, I had the sinking feeling it wouldn't be peace. It would be answers. And I wasn't sure I was ready for them. The lake house sat at the end of a long gravel road, tucked between thick trees like it was trying not to be found. The woods pressed in on both sides, and even with the sun still up, everything felt heavy. Like the air itself didn't want us there. Sophie's mood changed the moment the house came into view. She went completely silent. Her hands clutched her seatbelt, eyes wide and locked on the cabin. I asked if she was okay, and she nodded slowly, then whispered, "She's waiting." There were no cars in the driveway. The place looked abandoned, windows dusty, weeds growing up the sides. But the front door wasn't locked. It creaked open with barely a push. Inside, it smelled like old pine and something faintly metallic. Dust floated in the air. Furniture covered with white sheets. The kind of place frozen in time. Except, there were fresh footprints in the dust. Small ones. Sophie-sized. She walked in like she'd been here 1,000 times. Straight down the hallway. Past the kitchen. Into a small room with a boarded-up window. She stood in the center of it, staring at the wall like she could see something I couldn't. "This is where she talks to me," she said. I was trying to stay calm. But everything in me was on high alert. I asked her who she was. "Mommy." But not just Mommy. I froze. "What do you mean?" "She's Mommy, but she's also someone else. Sometimes she's happy. Sometimes she's mad. When she's mad, she says weird things. I crouched beside her, trying to keep my voice steady. What kind of things? Sophie's lips trembled. She says I'm not hers. A chill ran through me so fast it made my head spin. That's when I noticed the floorboards near the closet weren't nailed down. I lifted one. Beneath it was a small, locked box, and carved into the wood under the box, just barely visible under the dust, was a name I hadn't heard in years. Not my wife's name, but the name of someone I'd long forgotten. Someone I thought was dead. The name carved into the wood hit me like a punch to the chest. Mara. It was written in jagged letters, the kind a child, or someone desperate, might scrawl into wood. And the second I saw it, memories I hadn't touched in over a decade surged back. Mara was my wife's sister. Her twin. They were identical in every way, down to their laugh and the way they tilted their heads when they were thinking. But Mara was different. She was wild, reckless, and full of the kind of energy that made you uneasy. I only met her twice, both times early in my relationship with Sarah. And then she disappeared. Sarah told me she'd left the country, that the family didn't talk about her anymore. Something about a breakdown, maybe drugs. It was vague, but I didn't press. I trusted her. I believed what she told me. Because why wouldn't I? Now I was standing in a house I didn't know existed, staring at Mara's name under the floorboards of a hidden room, one my daughter claimed was where her mother came to talk to her. Only now. I didn't know which sister she meant. I forced myself to open the box. It was cold to the touch, as if it had been buried in snow. Inside, there were photographs. Old ones. Most of them were of two little girls, identical twins, hugging, laughing, climbing trees. Sarah and Mara. A couple of them were labeled on the back. But the more recent ones, those were harder to stomach. One photo showed a woman holding a newborn, staring straight into the camera. But the woman's face was scratched out. Deep gouges dug into the print, like someone had done it in a rage. I turned it over. In faint ink, it read, "She stole everything from me." My hands started shaking. I shuffled through the rest. One had a date, just a week before our wedding. Another was of the lake house porch, taken from the woods. Someone had been watching us. Sophie came over, looked into the box, and said, "That's the other mommy. The one that gets mad." I asked her softly, "Do you know where she is now?" She didn't blink. "She's still here." That's when the front door slammed shut behind us. And we were no longer alone in that house. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. Sophie flinched. My heart raced. I stood up so fast I knocked the box over, photos scattering across the floor. I rushed to the hallway, empty. No footsteps. No shadows. Just that oppressive silence, thicker now, like the house itself was holding its breath. "Sophie," I whispered, "stay behind me." We moved slowly through the hallway, room by room. Living room, empty. Kitchen, empty. I checked the door. It was shut, but not locked. No sign of anyone having come in. But it had closed hard. Like someone had thrown their weight into it. Or something had. Then I heard it. A faint creaking upstairs. The lake house was only one story. At least, that's what I thought. But as I followed the sound, I realized there was a narrow pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling, one I'd completely missed before. It led to an attic. The creaking came again. Slower this time. I told Sophie to stay put. She nodded, serious, still. Like she understood the danger without needing it explained. I pulled the ladder down. It groaned as it unfolded. Then I climbed. The attic was freezing. Much colder than it should have been. I scanned the space with my phone flashlight, dusty beams, broken insulation, a few old boxes. And then, something moved. In the far corner, behind a stack of crates, I saw the shape of a woman. Not standing. Crouching. Hair matted. Face pale. Eyes wide. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She just stared. And the terrifying part? She looked exactly like my wife. Except not how she looked when she died. This version was older. Thinner. And she was smiling. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. She whispered, "She always said you'd come back." And that's when I realized, Sarah might not have been the one who died. I couldn't move. The woman in the attic, this twisted, hollow version of Sarah, wasn't flinching, wasn't blinking. Just crouched there like an animal that had waited years in silence for someone to finally open the door. "She said you wouldn't believe me," she whispered again. "But you were always so gullible." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My brain couldn't process what I was looking at. My wife had died. I saw her in the hospital. I buried her. We held a funeral. Her ashes were in our home. So who was this? She stood slowly. Same height. Same bone structure. But now I could see the differences, the way her lips curled, too tight. The sunken cheeks, her left hand trembling ever so slightly. I tried to stop her, she said. I really did. But Sarah was always the favorite. She got everything. Even you. My chest tightened. Mara, I finally managed to say. She laughed. But it wasn't a laugh. It was a crack in the silence, dry and bitter. She wanted your perfect life. The husband. The child. The safety. She took my name. My identity. I warned her. I shook my head. None of this made sense. Sarah died. But Mara's expression turned almost sad. No, Marcus. I died. At least on paper. She made sure of it. I backed toward the ladder. Where is Sophie's mother? That's when her smile returned, sharper this time. She stepped forward. She's been here. All along. I scrambled down the ladder, heart hammering. Sophie was still standing in the hallway, her eyes wide. She's awake, Daddy, she whispered. She's really awake now. Before I could react, the lights flickered. Then every door in the house slammed shut at once. Including the one behind me. And Sophie? Sophie wasn't beside me anymore. The echo of the slamming doors faded into silence so thick it felt like the house itself was pressing in on me. I spun around, calling Sophie's name, but nothing. No footsteps. No voice, just that unbearable stillness, and the sound of my own pulse thudding in my ears. I ran down the hall, yanking open every door, bathroom, closet, bedrooms, empty. No sign of her. Then I heard it. A faint tapping. Rhythmic. From beneath the floorboards. The crawl space. My stomach dropped. I raced to the kitchen and found the hatch door behind the pantry shelf. I'd noticed it earlier and assumed it led to plumbing access. Now, the air around it felt colder than the rest of the house. I grabbed a flashlight, flung the hatch open, and dropped into the darkness. The crawl space was low and tight, the beams groaning overhead like the house was breathing. The tapping was louder now, coming from the far corner. I crawled. And there she was, Sophie, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, eyes closed, humming that same lullaby again. Facing the wall. In front of her, drawn into the dirt with a stick, was a name. Over and over again. Mara. 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 Sophie, I whispered, breath shaking. Come here. She opened her eyes slowly. She's coming, she said. And then the temperature dropped. Like we were inside a freezer. I turned to look behind me. Anne. She was there. The woman from the attic. Except now, she wasn't Mara. She wasn't Sarah. She was both. Her face kept shifting, Mara's eyes, Sarah's smile, back and forth like a broken reel of film. And her voice was two people at once, layered and unnatural. I told you, it said. She's not yours. I grabbed Sophie and backed up, but there was nowhere to go. Just low beams, dirt, and that voice wrapping itself around us. You took everything from me. Now she's mine. That's when Sophie stood. And for the first time since Sarah's death, she looked angry. No, she said firmly. You're not Mommy. Mommy's gone. You're the one who lied. And just like that, something snapped. The air shifted. The voice faltered. The woman, whoever she was, screamed. Not in words. Just raw, animal sound. Her body convulsed and slammed against the beams, over and over, until light began pouring in from above. I shielded Sophie, and in the flash of light, I saw Sarah. Just for a second. Calm. Soft-eyed. Smiling. Then it was gone. When I opened my eyes again, we were in the living room. The house was quiet. Sophie was asleep in my arms. And the box, the one from under the floorboards, was sitting on the coffee table, open and empty. We left and never went back. I never figured out how Mara faked her death, or what really happened between the sisters. But I know this much. The woman I buried wasn't the woman I married. And my daughter? She saw through the lie before I ever did. Now, every so often, Sophie still hums that lullaby. But when I ask her about it, she just shrugs and says, I don't remember. I don't press anymore. Some truths are better left buried. Even when they claw their way back from the dark.